The Messerschmitt Me-262, nicknamed Swallow, is a fighter aircraft and fighter bomber that was designed and produced by the German aircraft manufacturer Messerschmitt. It was the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft. The design of what would become the Me-262 started in April 1939, before World War II. It made its maiden flight on April 18, 1941 with a piston engine, and its first jet-powered flight on July 18, 1942. Progress was delayed by problems with engines, metallurgy, and interference from Luftwaffe chief Hermann Göring and Adolf Hitler. The German leader demanded that the Me-262, conceived as a defensive interceptor, be redesigned as bomber aircraft. The aircraft became operational with the Luftwaffe in mid-1944. The Me-262 was faster and more heavily armed than any Allied fighter, including the British jet-powered Gloster Meteor. The Allies countered by attacking the aircraft on the ground and during takeoff and landing. One of the most advanced World War II combat aircraft, the Me-262 operated as a light bomber, reconnaissance, and experimental night fighter. The Me-262 proved an effective dogfighter against Allied fighters. German pilots claimed 542 Allied aircraft shot down, although higher claims have sometimes been made. The aircraft had reliability problems because of strategic materials shortages and design compromises with its Junkers Jumo 004 axial flow turbojet engines. Late war Allied attacks on fuel supplies also reduced the aircraft's effectiveness. Armament production within Germany was focused on more easily manufactured aircraft. Ultimately, the Me-262 had little effect on the war because of its late introduction and the small numbers that entered service. The jet engine program was waylaid by a lack of funding, which was primarily due to a prevailing attitude amongst high-ranking officials that the conflict could be won easily with conventional aircraft. Among these was Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, who cut the engine development program to just 35 engineers in February 1940. The month before the first wooden mock-up was completed. The aeronautical engineer Willy Messerschmitt sought to maintain mass production of the piston-powered, 1935 origin Bf-109. Major General Adolf Galland had supported Messerschmitt through the early development years, flying the Me-262 himself on April 22, 1943. By that time, the problems with engine development had slowed production of the aircraft considerably. One particularly acute problem was the lack of an alloy with a melting point high enough to endure the temperatures involved, a problem that had not been adequately resolved by the end of the war. After a November 1941 flight ended in a double flameout, the aircraft made its first successful flight entirely on jet power on July 18, 1942, propelled by a pair of Jumo 004 engines. During mid-1943, Adolf Hitler envisioned the Me-262 as a ground attack and bomber aircraft rather than a defensive interceptor. The configuration of a high-speed, light-payload Schnellbomber or fast bomber was intended to penetrate enemy airspace during the expected Allied invasion of France. Hitler's interference helped to extend the delay in bringing the aircraft into operation. But other factors contributed too. In particular, there were engine vibration problems which needed attention. In his memoirs, Albert Speer, then Minister of Armaments and War Production, claimed Hitler originally had blocked mass production of the Me-262, before agreeing in early 1944. Similar criticisms were voiced by Lieutenant General Adolf Galland. Hitler rejected arguments that the aircraft would be more effective as a fighter against the Allied bombers destroying large parts of Germany and wanted it as a bomber for revenge attacks. According to Speer, Hitler felt its superior speed compared to other fighters of the era meant it could not be attacked, and so preferred it for high-altitude straight flying. Based on the proposal from a September 1943 report, the Me-262 A-2a, nicknamed Sturmvogel or Stormbird, was the definitive fighter-bomber version of the Me-262. While similar to the Me-262 A-1a, the A-2a featured bomb racks capable of carrying two 250 kg or 500 kg bombs under the fuselage, and the upper pair of guns was deleted for balance. though some aircraft retained their empty upper gun ports. The A-2a Sturmvogel was developed due to Hitler's continued insistence on developing the Me-262 into a fighter-bomber variant. In May 1944, after learning the fighter-bomber role had not been worked on, Hitler reaffirmed his order that such an aircraft must take precedent over the fighter variant without further delay. Any modification of the existing 262's airframe were already problematic, and it forced designers at Messerschmitt to make compromises for the fighter-bomber variant. This included the removal of 2 of the 430mm cannons in the nose. This was to help offset an inherent imbalance of the airframe, especially once the payload was dropped and the weight was lifted. The Sturmvogel also received 2 hardpoints for carrying bombs. These changes would ultimately produce a heavier Me-262 with altered flight characteristics and experienced pilots to operate them. However, by 1944, the Luftwaffe has lost air superiority over the skies of Europe, and experienced pilots were coming up in short supply. Ultimately, development of the fighter variant was allowed to proceed with every 20th Me-262 set aside for the fighter role. Yet even these were requested to be completed with some sort of bomb-carrying/release modification. When Hitler ordered that the Me-262 should be a pure bomber, no example of the type had ever dropped a bomb. In fact, the Me-262 was spectacularly ill-suited to the bomber role. Downward visibility from the cockpit was poor, fitting an effective bomb sight was a real challenge, and bomb-carrying capacity was extremely limited. Consequently, the Luftwaffe and Messerschmitt set to work on modifications that could turn the base aircraft into a bomber with the minimum of changes. Attention initially focused on a conversion of the B-1 two-seat trainer, with the backseater operating a periscopic bomb sight. However, it was determined that a 2-meter-long periscope would be needed to provide visibility past the bombs dangling beneath the aircraft's nose. And the process of designing both the periscope itself and the modified cockpit would take at least 9 months. The ingenious alternative was to simply swap the aircraft's cannon nose for a small, glazed cabin in which the bombardier could lie prone on his chest and operate a bomb sight positioned in front of the bombs. This was to be the A-3 variant and might eventually have become the most produced Me-262 subtype. However, the new nose proved difficult to build out of wood, the only material available by late 1944, and its fate was sealed by a failed stress test, where the wooden cabin splintered too easily. As such, the modification was confined to 2 flying prototypes and relegated to the A-2a/U2 designation. They were built with a glazed nose for a bombardier. This is the second prototype, which was captured at Weimar when the war ended. It made 16 test flights, the last of which, on March 30, 1945, ended with an undercarriage collapse. After the end of the war, the Me-262 and other advanced German technologies were quickly swept up by the Soviets, British and Americans, as part of the USAF's Operation Lusty. Many Me-262s were found in readily reparable condition and were confiscated. The Soviets, British and Americans wished to evaluate the technology, particularly the engines. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you, and see you in the next video.